The stories about Blackwood Forest have been passed down through generations, each version more chilling than the last. As a child, I'd sit wide-eyed as the elders spoke of the Scarecrow Man, a vengeful spirit, a farmer who was betrayed by the townsfolk, now cursed to wander the woods at night. The legend was enough to keep most people away, but I never believed in such tales. To me, they were just stories meant to scare kids and keep them out of trouble. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. Despite the warnings and the fear that gripped the town every time someone mentioned Blackwood Forest, I couldn't shake the urge to explore it myself. It was the allure of the unknown, the thrill of adventure that called to me. So one crisp autumn weekend, I decided to do what no one else dared. I packed my camping gear, grabbed a couple of books, and headed straight for Blackwood Forest. I told myself it was just another weekend in nature, nothing more, nothing less. When I arrived at the edge of the forest, the sun was still high in the sky. The trees towered above me, their branches twisted into eerie shapes that seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers. I felt a chill creep down my spine as I stepped into the shadowy woods, but I quickly dismissed it as nerves. After all, I was the one who didn't believe in ghost stories, right? I walked deeper into the forest until I found a secluded clearing, far from the main path. The air was cool, and the sounds of the forest were all around me, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the occasional snap of a twig. I spent the afternoon setting up camp, gathering firewood, and preparing for the night. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long, sinister shadows across the ground. By the time I had a fire going, the forest was bathed in twilight, the sky above fading from orange to deep indigo. As night fell, the atmosphere in the forest changed. The comforting warmth of the day was replaced by an unsettling coldness that seeped into my bones. The once familiar sounds of nature now seemed distorted, strange, as if the forest itself was whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. But I tried to push those thoughts aside. After eating a quick meal, I settled down by the fire with a book, determined to enjoy the peace and quiet. But the peace was short-lived. As I read, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The sensation was so strong that I found myself glancing over my shoulder every few minutes, expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. I brushed it off as paranoia and tried to focus on my book, but the unease only grew stronger with each passing moment. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear, and I decided to call it a night. I crawled into my sleeping bag, the warmth of the fire still lingering in the air. As I lay there, the sounds of the forest seemed to close in around me. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a twig sent a jolt of fear through my body. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind or a small animal, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Still, I closed my eyes, hoping sleep would come quickly and put an end to my growing anxiety. But sleep did not come easily. I was drifting in and out of uneasy dreams when I was suddenly jolted awake by a sound of faint, distant noise that set my nerves on edge. I lay still, listening intently, my heart pounding in my chest. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I heard it again, a low, eerie moan carried on the breeze. My blood ran cold as I listened, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Panic surged through me as I realized the footsteps were getting closer, coming from the direction of the trees. I lay frozen in my sleeping bag, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my body refused to move. The footsteps stopped just outside my tent, and for a moment, all was silent. Then the tent flap rustled slightly, as if something or someone was just outside waiting. My heart pounded in my ears as I peeked out from behind the tent, and that's when I saw him, the Scarecrow Man. The figure moved through the trees with an unnatural, jerky motion, his body twisted and contorted as if he were a puppet being manipulated by some unseen force. His face was a grotesque mask of burlap, stitched together with frayed threads, and his eyes, or where his eyes should have been, were nothing but empty black holes. In his hand, he held a rusted scythe that glinted ominously in the moonlight. His movements deliberate, as if he knew exactly where he was going. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, his head turning slowly as he surveyed the area. I ducked behind a tree, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. For what felt like an eternity, he stood there, his hollow eyes scanning the campsite. Then, as if he had sensed something, he began to move again, heading straight for my tent. His movements were slow and deliberate, his head jerking back and forth as he searched for something or someone. Suddenly he stopped. His head snapped up, and he turned towards the tree where I was hiding. It was as if he had sensed my presence, his hollow eyes locking onto mine. A wave of terror washed over me as I realized there was no escape. He had found me. For a moment, I was paralyzed with fear, unable to think, unable to move. I sat there, heart pounding, my mind racing. I held my breath, praying that he wouldn't find me, that he would somehow miss my hiding spot. After what felt like an eternity, the Scarecrow Man finally turned and began to walk back towards the trees. I watched him disappear into the shadows, his grotesque figure fading into the darkness. But then something inside me snapped. Survival instinct kicked in, and I knew I had to get out of there. Without thinking, I bolted from my hiding spot, sprinting through the forest as fast as my legs would carry me. The Scarecrow Man let out a guttural, inhuman scream, a sound that sent chills down my spine and fueled my desperation to escape. Branches whipped at my face as I tore through the underbrush. I didn't dare look back. I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. But I knew I couldn't stop, not if I wanted to live. I reached the car, fumbling with the keys as I yanked the door open. I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut just as I saw a dark figure emerge from the trees. My hands trembled as I shoved the key into the ignition, and with a roar, the engine sprang to life. Without a second thought, I floored the gas pedal, the tires screeching as I sped down the road. As I drove, my heart still raced, and the fear that had gripped me in the forest lingered like a shadow. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if he was still there, watching me, waiting. The road blurred as tears filled my eyes, but I didn't slow down. I kept driving, putting as much distance between myself and that cursed forest as possible. I never went back to Blackwood Forest, and I never will. The stories were true. The Scarecrow Man was real, and I was lucky to escape with my life. As I drove away from that cursed place, I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with an unshakable unease. When I finally reached home, the comforting familiarity of my surroundings did little to ease the lingering dread. I tried to settle back into my routine, but the memories of that night kept resurfacing, haunting me at every turn. Every shadow seemed to hold a hint of the Scarecrow Man's presence, every creak of the house a reminder of the forest's dark grip. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to shake the feeling that he was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the next fool who dared to enter his domain. The thought that he might somehow find me, even now, made my skin crawl. The Scarecrow Man was real, and the forest was his territory. And as for me, I vowed never to think about going near that forest again. Not ever.